Ogres are one of the fantasy races that find themselves in a really congested spot. There's so many other types of creature that do a similar thing. A brutish, monstrous human who has more bronze than brain and wants nothing more than to clobber you and eat your flesh. Something like an orc or a troll is a very similar thing, and ogres often struggle to stand out. So, when I was making the ogre race for my system, I decided to look further abroad and see how other settings and systems handled ogres. Also, just gonna start with a short preamble. If you're here for Warhammer mini paying stuff, this is another one of my hobbies. I really like D&D. But if you are here for Warhammer, this is not that. So, just to give a little bit of background, I am a huge fan of RPGs and D&D. I don't always play D&D. I like other RPGs, but when I do, I've come to curate a set of rules that mix from different systems, from different time periods. A little bit of AD&D, 3.5, both the Pathfinders and 5e, all sort of mixed together in ratios that I approve of, right? And I curate that, and that's when I DM, that's what I'm usually running. So when I am compiling a race, I like to look through just all those sources, right? So here is probably the most important source for this race. It's the 3.5 Ogre. So what I like about it is it does what an Ogre does. Massive bonuses of strength. These did not quite carry over into my Ogre. Minus dexterity. I'm okay with that. But then a very high walking speed. And then, big con, big int, or sorry, big con, but then small int, small charisma, large size penalties. These do carry over into my system. And then a few extra things, namely, I like this natural armor bonus. I like an ogre just being a tough, blubbery guy. There's also stats for an ogre barbarian here. Ogres are classically given with barbarian levels, which is an okay system, but not something that I really want to translate over. I also will note that this is a level adjusted class. This was a system in stuff like 3.5. Actually, I think it's only in 3.5. A lot of people don't like. I love it personally. Effectively, what it means is in 5e terms, it's like a multi class for your race. It's like a penalty because certain races get extra stats, extra abilities that make them intrinsically more powerful than a human character. And I like that little bit of flavor and how that translates over, especially for maybe in future videos, we might go over certain races like a Dragonborn in my system, which is a very powerful being that also gets a +2 level adjustment. And I think that really sells the flavor and lets you go bonkers with some of the rules. But just to take a quick sev look over, we got Pathfinder Ogres. They cease to be a playable race, I believe, here. Um, I was looking through, and the main thing I pulled from here is Iron Will. I like this. I like the ability of ogres having a degree of mental resilience and fortitude. Sorry about that. I'm getting some noise outside. I had to re-record this bit. So I believe we're talking about Iron Will in the Pathfinder version of the ogre, which I don't think the 3.5 one had. No, it just had toughness and great club weapon focus. So I like ogres being dumb, but having a layer of sort of defensive, like mental protection, like them being a little bit more, being a little bit more resilient to, in this case, will, but in my system in 5e, wisdom saving throws. I like that idea. So I decided to curate that, and I couldn't really take much from 5e. A very similar spread of ability scores. They also decrease wisdom, which I actually like. I think there's a lot of sort of low int races that kind of have pretty decent wisdom scores, but I like the fact that they are simple on two fronts. However, what I did not carry over is all these versions of Ogre had negative charisma. I decided not to give them a negative charisma. I thought, it'll be funny if that stat is unhampered. So for my ogre, I have a bunch of flavor that I still need to write, but we have all the mechanics drawn up. So level adjustment 2, like the 3.5, I'm a fan of that system, or at least that approach to potentially more powerful player races. I gave them a pretty solid increase to their strength, not quite a +10, but still really nice. A +4 to their con, -4 to their int, -3 to their whiz. I left their dex and charisma unmodified. So I also increased their walking speed just a little bit. I don't want them to be too fast, especially because I want them to be sort of blubbering but not quite undexterous, if that makes sense, which was why I didn't alter dexterity. Also, if you see these soft cap numbers, don't worry too much. It's part of how stat progression in my system works, but I don't think this is really a time for that. I did give them a language called Brute Speak, which is shared by all of the most degenerated giantkin. So trolls, Famir, if you're familiar with Warhammer Fantasy, it's those guys. I just stole them. I gave them a fun natural AC ability where it can't be decreased by their size penalty, which is part of their large size thing here. And it is unmodified by dex bonus, so you are not penalized for dumping dex in terms of your unarmored AC, which I think is kind of fun. And I would, if one of my players wanted, I would allow that to stack with, for example, stuff like unarmored defense for a berserker or a monk. They're proficient in lots of weapons, namely stuff they can bludgeon people with. I think that's like so classic that I'll just leave that as it is. For features, large size. This is the classic ability, very similar to something like Pathfinder or 3.5. If you've played 5e, you may not be familiar, but I would assume most people have at least heard of this. Basically, if you're a big guy, you're going to be less likely to hit, you're going to be easier to hit, but in exchange, you get a few bonuses. Specifically for ogres, I think they're really going to like their extra weapon dice. So, for example, if you're wielding a maul, like your like one of your racial weapons is, you'll deal 3d6 instead of 2d6, which is quite fun. Before you mentioned that I liked I believe it was Iron Will. I quite like that thing for ogres. I gave them a sort of similar-ish ability, which gives them resistance to psychic damage, and it gives them advantage on certain saves. I was debating making this a little bit more broad, maybe introducing resistance to the charm and fear, but I like those kinds of effects being able to afflict ogres, but make them hard to daze, paralyze, or stun is fine. Makes them a little bit more resilient to stuff like hold person, hold monster. Oh, finally, the big one. I thought ogres are generally a little bit boring in the way they're categorized in D&D. Right? They're not the most amazing thing. And like I alluded to before, to sauce them up, I looked at Warhammer Fantasy. If you guys know Warhammer Fantasy, you know all about the Great Maw. Ogres are cursed with eternal hunger, and these guys are much the same. The theming is a little bit different for my world, but very similar concept. It is a curse, so it can be removed through remove curse, but you might not want to do that because you do have to consume double rations, and you're already large, so that's 4 rations a day you need to eat. But you get some cool bonuses. There's also this lore thing, right? I included things like this in the ability section because I honestly think that it is a real penalty to have to roleplay that, right? That is a extra bit of work I want that player to have to do. And I decided to put here instead of in like a lore blurb, just to put extra emphasis. Hey, this is a thing you need to reflect when you're role playing your character. I don't want to be too bossy, but I think stuff like that is quite fun to make interesting races, having some restriction there. But as a fun little bonus, if you've eaten well and you have more food, this happens. It's quite difficult to make this really work if just lugging around a bunch of rations. You can, obviously, but you might not want to go through rations like that. However, ogres, at least in my games, ogres do love eating like slain creatures and enemies. You can conduct a gorging where you eat a bunch of rations, or the equivalent in like meat or whatever. Let's say you kill a dragon, you just start consuming its corpse. You gain a bunch of temp HP, and this actually times your proficiency bonus. So equal to number of rations you eat times proficiency bonus means that this is a multiplicative scaling, meaning at high levels this continues to matter, and is one of the big things with level adjustment in 3.5 I didn't like, where oftentimes they'd be good for fighters or good for characters that you really knew what level you're going to be playing at, but they typically didn't scale well. At least most races didn't. So I like having some level of scaling in the abilities themselves that will make you feel better about taking them. Obviously, Ogre is a little bit typecast into being a melee brute guy. Even this second part, which is also very good, only applies to melee attacks. But still, it's a really nice bonus, and it does have some scaling to it. I'm sure you could definitely make it work with something like a rogue or something that I think might be cool. Doing a wizard or something of that nature may be a little bit more difficult. I might, that's the kind of thing where I like player custom feats to come into it. Like maybe if you're an ogre and you're a mage, you get a specific feat. You work with me to make a specific feat that makes this instead apply to your spells, right? That might be a cool way of going about it. However, let's tab over here because I actually made an example character, example ogre. Let me just pull that up really quick. Okay, so this is a character named Bogo the Ogre. He is partially the reason I finalized my ogre race, and I've been working on it in the past few days. He is an NPC that's been trailing the party for quite a while. He belongs to a criminal syndicate, and he acts as like a bit of muscle, and he is a gladiator. I'm not really. It's a pretty detailed, intensive class, so I don't really want to go through all the finer points of that, but I assume the name sort of gets you there. He's chaotic neutral, going on chaotic evil. It really depends on how nicely you ask him to do something. If he, where his alignment ends up. In a lot of ways, he's the prototypical ogre, right? He is already strong, but then that gets added on to that insane strength that ogres get. He is already tough, and that gets again compounded by the bonuses that ogres get to con. And then his two dump stats here, or three really, but he has a very, very low intelligence and wisdom, which is quite fun to roleplay. As a DM, it makes him a fun little bit character. And you can see he really takes advantage of that large size to get some pretty brutal damage out with these punch blades and unarmed strike combo that he gets from his pit fighting ability here. Again, at some point we need to go into all of this. um, and yeah, this is obviously going to be quite a bit different if you've only seen a 5e character sheet, or even if you've seen like something. Again, this is a custom character sheet for this system. But it gives you an example of what an ogre character might look like. Again, a little bit typecast, but I think it's always fun to work with a player to go against the grain and come up with something a little bit more unique if they did want to do like that ogre wizard or that ogre cleric. And we could, obviously give them some extra boosts in terms of extra feats or stuff as they go along, just to make sure that they don't feel too bad for taking something, quote unquote, unoptimal.
Ogres, my lord.